show you here. Now, these are the damages, the top 50 damages, which we've got in disasters. And I've presented here the size of the disaster. And here you'll see quite a mixture of countries. I'm afraid it's rather small, but in absolute terms, quite a lot of the rich countries show up. So you have the damages in absolute terms. United States, one of the big disasters, 2005 Katrina is very big, followed by Japan, this Kobe earthquake here. And then we come down again, United States, then we get China coming up, Japan, Soviet Union, United States. Quite often you'll see United States coming in here, France, United States, Italy. This was 1994, I can't remember which one this would be, but this was damages, it was, which one? Sorry, I should keep something that I can walk across. The point of this graph is that when you look down at the top 50, of course it's a very steep curve, but a lot of rich countries are shown up there. But when you look at the same graph at the top here, sorry, what's happening? These are in terms of the damages as a percentage of GDP. As a percentage, as a percentage of GDP. And here you'll see that the countries that are listed in the group there, hardly any of the top 50 are wealthy countries. Can I just, Emilio was. So is that, can you hear me with that? Yeah. So you can see here, if you look here, Tajikistan, Grenada, Cayman Islands, Korean Democratic Republic, Mongolia, Samoa, Mongolia again, St. Kitts, Virgin Islands. The Caribbean islands are very subject to these disasters, wind-related disasters. So all the way down here, all this is as a percentage of GDP, and look how big it can be. And in the case of Tajikistan, in that 1992 damages were more than 3 times the value of GDP, with calculated as a result of that. So the picture looks very different when you take the top 50 as a percentage of GDP than when you take the top 50 in absolute terms. Okay, so damages from, of course, are losses to stocks of capital. But what is the stock of capital? The stock of capital is not just the physical capital, but it's also the natural and human capital. And the direct losses which are flows that result directly from these disruptions. But we're interested not only in the loss of capital, but also in the loss of income. So we look at the direct losses plus the higher order effects to calculate the losses in GDP, resulting from the declines in the stocks of different types of capital. And so this more complicated calculation includes this intersectoral impact of changes in these different capital stocks. And in this part of this program, which I was telling you about, we have had some very detailed work done by Okuyama and Sahin, who provided us with some estimates from 1960 to 1987. They took a sample of 184 disasters, and they looked at the average damage to the capital stock, as they called it, physical capital, which is about 742 billion, and that the direct losses were about 360 billion, which is the direct losses, but then the indirect higher order losses were about 678 billion. So we're looking at losses of that sort of order of magnitude when you compare the loss of capital against the loss of income, which follows it. Now, in the calculation in their sample, volcanoes and earthquake losses dominate. Climatological losses, climatological are droughts and extreme temperatures, are the smallest, about 11%. And then hydrological, which are floods and landslides, and meteorological, which are storms and cyclones, are each about 25%. Now, over time, damages are increasing, as I said, but there are also cycles in series for individual disasters. And also disaster damages as a percentage of GDP, world GDP are not showing a trend. They also felt that there was some evidence for a sort of U-shaped relation between GDP and per capita damage. And what they thought when they plotted it, that this could be a picture. So you may be familiar with something we call the kind of Kuznets curve, where we talk about the damage or the impact on the vertical axis, and here is the level of development or income on the horizontal axis. And they plotted the damages across countries, and they got a curve which the data look like this, the raw data. And for a statistician, maybe this is what I drew it by hand, this line, and of course they also thought, well, maybe it looks like that. But in fact, if you try and do more rigorous statistical tests, it doesn't pass it. It doesn't look as if we are dealing with a phenomenon which has such a clear U-shaped relationship between damages and development. So statistical tests do not confirm a disaster Kuznets curve, but they do confirm more likely a negative linear relationship. And this is statistically significant with climatological, geophysical, and hydrological events, which suggests that the damage, at least in per capita, in percentage terms, is bigger for smaller countries than it is for larger countries. We felt also that the link between loss of capital and income needs a more refined analysis in which different kinds of capital are treated differently. And so the work that I was involved in, we tried to separate out 3 kinds of capital for every country. And this calculating for each country in the world their stock of physical capital, sorry, just put it on. Stock of physical capital, the stock of human and social capital, which we call intangible capital, and the stock of natural capital. The physical capital is easy because, of course, it's buildings, it's equipment, and so on. Natural capital also is not so difficult because it consists of land, it consists of minerals, what we might have, forests, assets under the ground, as well as living assets and so on. But the most difficult category is this kind of intangible capital. And intangible capital included, of course, human capital, the knowledge and the education of individuals, plus what we call social capital, the set of network of relationships in any society. And so in some work which I'm not going to talk about today, each of these different forms of capital are involved in, have been measured, and we try to estimate the size of them. And what would be perhaps not so surprising to you is that for most countries, the largest component is this intangible capital. It's not, a country is not rich because it has a lot of physical capital. It's rich because it has a large quantity of human and social capital.